Thanks, Matt. Hi, my name is Ben Moon. I'm an adventure and lifestyle photographer. I've worked with clients such as Patagonia for the last uh, 15 years. Where's the clicker? Thank you. um, and yeah, like Matt was saying, I just recently switched. I originally, back in the film days, I shot Nikon for 5 years and then Canon for a decade before, you know, really uh, this system really evolved with, has come to a point where I really couldn't, had no choice but to make the switch. It was so good. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I do. My roots are in rock climbing photography. I'm a rock climber. I've been climbing for almost 20 years, and that's how I first got my start. And like I said, I was shooting for Patagonia, and they're one of the rare clients that they literally, it's not like a normal commercial shoot. You need to be, you actually do the sport with the athletes. And one thing about doing adventure work is you're always carrying your gear into remote places, and that's one thing that I've always noticed about carrying all the pro gear. I love a lot of lenses. I mean, my Canon kit was huge. I had 10 lenses and 2 bodies with me, on most trips, and so when it came down to carrying all those things in, it was a huge amount of weight and bulk. And one thing when you're shooting with adventure work, when you're hanging 1,000 feet off the deck, you want to have only what you need with you, and I prefer to have as many lenses as I need to be creative. And so I like a super wide, a fisheye or a 14. I love to have a 16-35, usually some sort of a prime, like a 24 or a 50. And I also love to have a telephoto with me as well, and then a medium zoom. And so that can add up to a heavy bag. And when you're hanging off a rope and have to go into a big climb, it really adds a lot, not only weight, but it's bulk, and you have to figure out how to have all that. And then also, all that weight on your back is like you need abs of steel to hold yourself up on that rope while you're shooting. And so it takes an immense amount of effort to not only get it up there, but with you. And so with my Sony kit, and ever since I switched, one thing I noticed is that my bag has shrunk immensely, and I have not done that at expense of quality. In fact, I feel like the quality has gone up. And whoops. And when you're up here on a rope, one thing you need to know is that you don't have a lot of time to adjust your exposure and your settings. And so having the EVF, a lot of people are like, how do I deal with going from an optical viewfinder to an EVF? I personally think that the EVF is one of the best things with mirrorless. As I'm shooting and as I'm on this wall, I know exactly what the exposure is as I'm shooting it. And that makes a huge difference in the amount of shots that I have that are spot on. And yes, sure, you can adjust it in post later, but when you have the proper exposure, you can just keep shooting and you don't accidentally have that shot. When you're swinging on a rope, you can like bump dials and accidentally bring it 2 stops under, 2 stops over. And that's just really important, especially when the lighting is a little bit trickier. Like this, it's like really backlit, and you don't know what you're exposing for if you're just shooting aperture priority, and I prefer to shoot manual, and so it's a lot better to have to know what your exposure is as you're shooting it. And the dynamic range in these cameras really it kind of blows me away of how much detail you can pull out of the highlights that would normally be gone. And the clouds, you normally think, oh, they're disappear, but the dynamic range of these cameras is really what one of the other benefits for me in really tricky lighting. So a lot of times you don't have the luxury of shooting at the golden hour, but you're shooting in midday. The other thing I want to mention is the low light capability of the A7S and the sensitivity of these sensors. It's not only that they can shoot at high ISOs, but you have the shadow detail is phenomenal, and the amount of detail you can pull out of the shadows is crazy when you're shooting in low light and after dark. And that to me is opened up a time when you can shoot. You don't just have to stop shooting when the sun goes down. You truly have the ability to shoot beyond that. And also, like these headlamp photos, normally you'd only have the beam of light from the headlamp lighting up things, but now you have the opportunity to actually bring the exposure up for the rest of the image. And like I said, this was after dark. My job also takes me to a lot of places. I'm a shooter for Patagonia. I get to, be in a lot of remote areas, and so my office has a view, which I appreciate that. And but also, like, here I'm charging my laptop and my batteries. It was on a long trip, and we, I need to have all the gear I have with me in a small package, and so to have the ability to bring the gear I need in a small bag with me anywhere is huge. I want to mention too the stabilized sensors on these new bodies. This was one of the first images I shot when the A7 II came out, and I had just kind of made the full switch over to Sony. I had sold most of my Canon glass, and it was just kind of getting familiar. And this was just on a vacation. I didn't have a laptop with me. I didn't have any, I just was simply like there to recharge. And I shot this at a tenth of a second handheld. And as an adventure photographer, I don't always have a tripod with me. I'm not someone who likes to lug a tripod around. It weighs me down, and it also, I like to shoot things in the moment as they're happening. And so to have the ability to shoot things handheld at this low of a shutter speed, and not just have, one every 5 shots in focus and sharp, but like every single one can be sharp. A lot of people ask me too how these cameras hold up in inclement weather. Like, are they weather shield enough? And honestly, I'm from the Pacific Northwest. I live in Hood River currently. I've been in the Northwest for the last 17 years. And I mean, I've taken these cameras out in full downpour all day long and just wiping them off with a rag, and it's kind of amazing how well they can hold up, and I completely trust them, and I am not easy on my gear. I abuse my gear beyond belief. I don't baby my gear, and these cameras hold up and they continue to perform, and it's really been a lot of fun to see what they can do. This is on a recent trip to the Aleutians out in Alaska. And that trip, it was raining, and we got everything. It's basically summertime in Alaska is kind of like wintertime in the Northwest. You get a little bit of everything every single day, and so it's nice to have gear that I know can operate in those conditions. And again, one thing that to me, I think that a lot of the reasons why smartphones were so prolific with pro photographers when everybody started using Instagram and everything. I believe that a lot of that came from, at least in my opinion, that because the best camera you have is the one with you, and when you have a pro DSLR and all these gear, I found the longer I went in my career, the more I was leaving that at home, because if I wanted to just go out for a quick hike in the woods or whatever, I don't necessarily want to bring everything I have with me. And with that, with smartphones, you're always losing quality. You didn't want to ever blow those photos up beyond like a 3x3 or 5x5 print. And now I feel like I can bring, one of these A7 bodies in a prime lens. I mean, I have three lenses and a body in a bag this small, and they're all fast primes. And to me, that's a huge thing. I'm not diminishing quality. I have a full frame sensor, 42 megapixels, and fast primes. I love the Loxia, the 50 Loxia from Zeiss, the Batiste 25 and 85. Like, those 3 pieces of glass go with me everywhere. And obviously, if I'm up on a climb, I tend to use zooms and such, but I love primes. And I think now with cameras getting with these cameras getting so good, I don't have an excuse to go out the door without them. And if I don't have the space for that, I can throw an RX-100 in my board shorts, and I do that sometimes. I'll just throw it in a Ziploc and go on out on whatever I'm doing and be out on the water, and it's really amazing, honestly, what we can do now. Oops, my fingers are in the wrong spot. When I first started to try out this system, I didn't know for sure yet if I wanted to make the switch, and so I had a month-long trip to Norway coming up, and I decided to just borrow the gear and see if I really wanted to use it. And I spent a month in Norway, just traveling around. It was 4 of us in a Volkswagen bus, and I brought my Canon setup too, just because I wasn't sure I wanted to make the switch yet. And I took maybe 5 frames the first night of just the scene that was going on, and I looked at both images on my, I downloaded them, looked at everything, and after that I tucked all the Canon gear away and just really dedicated myself for the rest of the trip to shoot with this Sony gear. And honestly, I have to say that it performed, and it not only performed, but it exceeded my expectations. And I started loving how the files, how they were processed, and how they would handle. I mean, one thing I love about having a smaller setup, I keep stressing that, is that I feel like it's always with you. So these candid moments, I just had it like in my sleeping bag with me when I woke up that morning, and you just have the ability to photograph moments as they're happening. Again, this is low light. This is, I think, shot at something like 50,000 ISO in pretty much the dark. And again, the detail you can get with these cameras is pretty phenomenal. Normally, I would just stop shooting then. Another thing I've noticed is, especially on these long approaches and these long hikes, I love to keep a camera out, but when you have a DSLR and a zoom or a fast prime on there, it can weigh you down. It just gets annoying if you're just hiking and moving on these long approaches to a climb or out there. And this was the first hike we did in Norway, and I remember just I had a 2470, I think I had the A7R with me, and I had it on the entire time, and I realized that it didn't weigh me down. I didn't notice it, and it was a huge relief to be able to carry a camera the entire time and not miss moments as they happened. And this we did, it was the tallest peak in Northern Europe, and again, I had that around my neck the entire hike, all the way up, and when they were coming through the fog in this shot, I was able to capture that moment as it happened. And another thing, when you're shooting, I shoot a lot of lifestyle, and for Patagonia, it's not a pose shot most of the time. It's usually just happening. And so these moments, if you're, roll up, if I don't have the camera out, or if I roll up with a big DSLR, it's like a lot of times people tend to freeze, and the candid moments aren't always there. But with this, I feel like I have the camera out all the time, and I'm able to just capture these moments as they happen. And like, again, the detail, the dynamic range of some of these images, I can push them around however I want. And if somebody's completely backlit, I still have detail in the shadows. I still have detail. The highlights and the lowlights are so like detailed that it's really phenomenal. So yeah, that trip really sealed the deal for me. And after that trip, I basically, one thing I want to mention is I went back to trying to use a normal optical viewfinder, and I had to give that kit back after the Norway trip. And I tried to use optical viewfinder, and I didn't know how I'd gotten so used to the EVF that I was really, really in love with it. And I realized I was like trying to take photos, and I was waiting for the exposure to change in the viewfinder. And I realized that, yeah, it was weird at first, but once I got used to it, it was probably one of my favorite things about mirrorless. And so that really sealed the deal for me. And this was in the Aleutian as well, but that trip I had all the new setup with me. I also shoot a lot of music, and this was the first it was a commercial set. Modest Mouse had just put out their first record in 8 years, and it was a high pressure shoot. There was a full grip truck, 1-ton grip truck in every motorhome and everything, and the detail we needed in this shot to pull. The guys in the cubicles were in the far background of the shot, and to be able to pull that sort of detail out of this was a shot with the A7R, to be able to pull that sort of detail out and do this composite shot was a big deal. But one thing I noticed on that shoot was that I was wondering if anybody cared, if I had a tiny little camera, and honestly, the guys in the band ended up wanting to buy the cameras because they wanted something that was really good quality on tour. And Isaac, the frontman, he's a photographer, and he's actually bought one for himself because he was so impressed with how the quality was, and it's a tiny little thing that he could take on tour. And this other project I have, that's an ongoing project, I shoot a lot of portraits of individuals that I come into contact with, and I really, I always noticed that with my old setup that an 85 is what I use for all these portraits. And no matter how hard I tried to, get the focus right, if your focus point was in someone's eye, it would search from the eyeball to the eyelash to the eye. It would 90% of these photos would be just a little bit out of focus, and that's because I shoot these at a really shallow aperture. And one thing that really impresses me about this setup is like I can I can punch in through the EVF. I can punch in, do focus magnification, and check my focus and get their retina absolutely just spot on in focus. And for me, this series is all about capturing emotion and like trying to capture someone as they're, in their more vulnerable state. And this is Chris Malloy. He's a surfer and filmmaker and a longtime mentor and hero of mine. And to be able to like capture a moment as it's happening instead of missing focus on that one expression is a big deal to me. And at this project, I've been doing it for years, and it's a really fun project for just. I have a simple setup. I have an 85 Batiste, my A7R2, and a small bounce card, and I can do these portraits anywhere. I just look for this quality of light, natural light, and I do the rest in post. And I really love how I can have a camera that's this big, that's not only the right quality, but I also is really less intimidating to my subjects. So when you're shoving a big 1DX and an 85 in somebody's face, it's a barrier between you and your subject. And I feel like one thing that's really nice about these is I can actually see what I'm taking a photo of, and I don't feel like I have this giant barrier between me and my subject. I also do a lot of filmmaking, and one thing, I used the FS700 for quite a while before I switched to Sony and the mirrorless system, and so I was familiar with the E-mount and the adapters that I could change my lenses and use whatever lenses I was using. But when I switched and got the FS7, I realized that all my lenses for the E-mount they transferred across the ecosystem, and that to me is a big deal. I can carry less gear. My crews are always small. I don't like having a huge set, and a lot of times we're out really in remote areas, and so we can use the same lenses across the board. And with the low light, you can with a Shogun on there, you can basically like capture these moments and time lapse and such, and also just you can adapt any glass to it. So an 800 big Nikon lens with a couple teleconverters, I could shoot with my FS7. And recently I made a video about my dog and I that basically went viral, and it was the first week it had 8 million views, and we shot a lot of that with the FS700, and so I'm familiar with that setup. And all I want to say about the videos, it's taught me a lot about authenticity and storytelling, and having that many people see it. I think it's up to 11 million views now, and it's about very personal story, but it also taught me that storytelling is about really connecting with the subject and authenticity, and I feel like this gear doesn't weigh you down. It's a lot smaller and more compact, and so for the work I do, it's just a blessing. It's something I've been wishing for years, is to have some gear that I can like carry in a small bag but not be losing any quality. So I'm sold on it, and I really encourage you to just check it out. So I would love to hear any questions if yeah. Yeah. You can also adjust the brightness of the viewfinder, the electronic viewfinder, and find it. I mean, and the thing that's happened with those viewfinders as well is that every generation they've gotten better, and they've increased the pixel density, and now it's with the newer like A7R Mark II, and even the little RX100 Mark IV, like the quality that you're getting out of that is immensely better. So. Well, the detail, yeah. I mean, I'm able to follow. The other thing I want to say about the EVF is that not only can I see what's happening, and the detail is there, and it's getting there, and I've adjusted to it. It is an adjustment. It takes a week or 2 weeks to adjust to it. But one thing I want to say is, like, I don't chimp anymore. I don't look at the back of my camera because I know the exposure is right, and you can have the image review come up in the viewfinder, and so that moment where you would normally have the mirror go up and down and you'd have the black, you have instead you have the reviewed image right there, and you know if you've got it. You don't have to like take the camera away from your eye, and so that's been huge for me. So overall, I feel like the EVF has been a huge help. You have a mic?
I just wonder, what image conversion software to use?
To process the images?
Yeah.
Lightroom and Photoshop, yeah.
Does Sony make one for the conversion?
I mean, not really. It's kind of like not. Yeah.
Just go to Lightroom.
Yeah. I go into Lightroom or Capture One. So yeah. So.
It's raw capturing, but
Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned with the portrait photography that you were showing just then that you look for like natural lighting conditions as well as the bounce card. What do you look for when you try to find those conditions?
I love open shade. I mean, really, just like here you have these giant buildings that are reflecting in, and I mean, I've watched the light this week. So the weather's been so great, and it's just there's incredible portrait light, and honestly, it's about the quality. And I think for me, it's just the bounce card is just to get some fill up in the eyes, and that's I took a portrait of John Krakauer recently, the author, and I didn't have a bounce with me, but he had a legal pad, and he just held it up, and that was enough to. We were in Park City, and so it was enough to get some light in his eyes. So, yeah. Anybody else? Oh, no worries.
Anybody else? No, I was just wondering the shutter mode in the A7R Mark II. There are 3 different shutter modes.
Mm-hmm.
You've got mechanical, electronic, first curtain, and then you got full, and then you have the silent shutter mode.
Yep.
I don't know if there are any compromises in using those, one of the 3. I've read certain things that you may lose some sharpness in particular shooting conditions like fast motion and very wide aperture, fast aperture lenses.
Yeah, I typically I use silent. I only use silent if I'm in the recording studio or somewhere where it's needed. But it does diminish slightly, I think, but not much. It's not really noticeable. I mean, you have such a large file, but I tend to leave it on the normal setting for that most of the time, unless I'm shooting in silent mode.
Yeah, I read somewhere that with the electronic first curtain shutter, it may not clear the sensor out fast enough, so you get a little ghosting left.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know? So I don't know. Do you use the electronic first curtain shutter?
I haven't used that much on that camera yet. No.
So you use the full mechanical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there one more?
Which lens was that? The 85?
What was that?
85
The 85 Batiste by Zeiss. Yeah, the new Batiste. It's beautiful. It's the bokeh, and that thing is just. I really love that lens. So, yeah. It's small. I mean, it's so lightweight for what the quality you get. So, yeah. 1.8.